Ever wonder what happened to Quiznos, the once uber successful sandwich chain that managed to captivate the sandwich market while sprawling across the United States and abroad? Famous for their delicious toasty subs, Quiznos skyrocketed to more than 4,700 locations. That's more than the combined number of stores Firehouse Subs and Arby's operate at today, only to take an epic nosedive into bankruptcy and shrink down to less than 500. So how did a modest sub shop explode into the minds of sandwich lovers all over the country, only to quickly fade into oblivion? Most would probably chalk it up as just another victim of the Great Recession, but some would say it was the curse of the Spongmonkeys. All of that and much more in this episode of Business Tales.
Quiznos. Toast.
The year was 1981. When experienced chef and entrepreneur Jimmy Lombardos co-founded Quiznos along with another man named Todd Disner in the Capitol Hill neighborhood of Denver, Colorado. Lombardos gathered inspiration from oven-baked sandwiches he'd enjoyed growing up in New York and helped create the warm, toasty creations we would all come to enjoy on a national level several years later. For Lombardos, it was quite simple, stating it's a signature type of thing. Heating anything brings out the flavors in food products. Just a few short years later, expansion began when franchising opportunities were offered, and by 1987, the business grew to 12 US locations. By 1991, a father-son franchisee duo named Rick and Richard Shadden, who already owned 3 Quiznos locations, purchased the company in its entirety and continued the expansion. After implementing things like standardized training and operating procedures and market support for its franchisees, the company would go on to make the leap into the stock market. In February 1994, Quiznos went public, offering 1 million shares at $5 per share. Just 3 years later, Quiznos Franchise Corp became the number 3 sub sandwich franchise in the entire world, with 278 locations throughout the US and Puerto Rico. And by the end of the century, expansion had been taken to a global level. As the company grew, so did its advertising efforts, which may have come off a little bit confusing to some. The idea of selling food by including strange singing rat-like creatures in TV ads seemed to be counterintuitive and possibly disturbing.
We love these subs! 'Cause they are toasty subs! The Quiznos Subs! They are so good we need them robot-eating roast houses barbaric!
But if the goal was to get Quiznos ingrained into the psyche of the American public for years to come, mission accomplished. So how did it all come crashing to a screeching halt? It was the perfect storm of timing, market competition, and questionable business practices that would turn this once massive chain into an afterthought in the sandwich world. In most cases, fast food franchises negotiate and buy their supplies directly from vendors at reduced bulk pricing. Quiznos, on the other hand, started a subsidiary company that purchased food and paper supplies and sold them directly to their franchisees. This subsidiary managed to take in around $500 million in 2006, while even at the company's peak of nearly 5,000 locations, the total gross sales for franchisees averaged around $400 million. This supply system meant that each franchise owner had to have a much higher number of total sales in order to make a profit than a competitor such as Subway. More on Subway in just a few moments. A restaurant typically has a food cost of around 30%, while Quiznos franchises were operating at around 39%. This was very harmful to the franchise owners and would lead to a major class action lawsuit against the company in 2006. The lawsuit was settled with a total payout of $206 million, and another combined $95 million was paid to more franchise owners who filed independent lawsuits. Some of them were just hopeful franchise owners who paid their franchise fees and were given nothing in return. And this is where things get dark in the story of Quiznos. In a very sad and unfortunate event, a franchisee decided to take their own life in the bathroom of a Quiznos after planning to travel to Denver to plead their case against what many in his shoes deemed to be unfair and hostage-like business practices. And in 2006, the Quiznos senior VP of marketing was arrested on felony charges after striking up a series of lewd online conversations and agreeing to meet up with what he perceived to be a teenage girl, only to find out he'd been talking to a Colorado police officer. And this is where the curse of the Spongmonkeys comes into play. Remember all those wonderful TV commercials in the mid-2000s you could never seem to mute fast enough? This was allegedly the same person responsible for those timeless ads, including one that featured a baby with an adult voice hitting on women. But this was just the beginning of the problems the toasty sub kings would face in the following years. In 2007, the economy would begin to shift into what we now know as the Great Recession. This was a time when paying nearly $10 for a sandwich became a thing of the past for most Americans. And around that time, Subway, the #1 competitor in the world of sandwiches, began offering $5 footlongs, a deal just too amazing for hungry consumers short on cash to pass up. But Quiznos offered something different, right? Their subs were warm and toasty, something you couldn't get anywhere else. Well, unfortunately, toasting bread is not proprietary, and just a few years earlier in 2005, Subway had installed toaster ovens in nearly all of its locations, offering the option of a crunchy sandwich at no extra charge and taking away the market advantage from Quiznos. Quiznos eventually responded to the low prices of Subway and other fast food chains at the time by lowering its prices and offering coupons for free sandwiches in an effort to drive consumers back into their restaurants. This put an even tighter squeeze on the store operators, with some refusing to accept the coupons and angering customers. This began to cause further damage in the already tarnished reputation of the chain at a time when many Americans were struggling with the ongoing recession. During that time, several thousand locations closed down, and in 2012, a majority stake in the company was purchased by Avenue Capital Group in an effort to restructure. The deal was said to relieve the company of around $300 million of its $900 million in debt and infuse $150 million cash into the business. A new CEO was named, and an effort was made to put a focus on quality of food as a countermeasure to the ever-shrinking sales. Unfortunately, the efforts would not be enough to keep Quiznos from filing Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which it did in March of 2014, further reducing its debt by $400 million. In 2016, yet another CEO was named, who would usher in a relief effort to its remaining franchise owners by cutting corporate payments and beginning a new loyalty program. Unfortunately, by this time, most of the country had nearly forgotten about Quiznos and the creepy Spongmonkeys and had moved on to other up-and-coming sandwich competitors. In June 2018, the company was purchased by California-based High Bluff Capital Partners, who also owns Taco Del Mar. The future of Quiznos is up in the air, and many questions still remain, like, has the curse of the Spongmonkeys finally been lifted, and will Quiznos ever be able to stage a comeback? But only time will tell. If you enjoyed this episode of Business Tales, be sure to subscribe for more content, and as always, thank you for watching.